Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Curiosity Monkey podcast. Today we're joined by Liam. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Well, it's been a while since I've been on, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
been a while.
good.
Was the last one Mario Kart ranking tracks?
I think
I
that
think that
was
could
the
have been
last one. Yeah,
that was like April time.
yeah, right. About, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, we are back with another episode. Finally, I think I've mostly been doing these by myself over the last few months at least. So it's good to have someone else on again because yeah, it makes it more interesting, mixes things up.
It's just yeah,
And
good.
today,
Good to not be a loser. I think it just generally seems a positive thing.
very good,
I'm
very
happy to
good.
help.
And today's episode, we are looking at some interesting life forms. Say life forms because we could have picked anything really that's living, but Liam's picked one, and I've picked one, and we're just gonna run through them and why we think they're interesting. Maybe they've not been heard of much by other people, not very commonly known, or they could have some very interesting characteristic that makes them kind of special and unique. Uh, yeah. So Liam, do you want to do yours first, or shall I do mine first?
Uh, how about you go first?
Okay, sure. Well, my organism is the Greenland shark, and the Greenland shark is pretty cool. I chose it for a few reasons, and I'll get onto that in a second. First, I'll run through kind of what the Greenland shark is. The Greenland shark is quite a large shark of the Somniosidae family. Yeah, it took me a while to pronounce that. I had to look it up beforehand. uh, so
It's
yeah,
just
that's
all of it. I
interesting.
don't know why biologists made it all so difficult.
They do make it hard, but biologists are better at like English and writing and stuff, so
So you think
may,
they pick better
they can pronounce
words?
it.
So you
Yeah,
they should be able to find the better words. There's no
that's
excuses.
true. No excuse. Anyway, large shark of the Somniosidae family, which is also known as the sleeper shark family. And when I say they're large, they're quite large. They're one of the largest shark species that are alive today. So their maximum recorded length was 6.4 meters long, and coming in at around 1,000 kilos. I think it was 1,023 kilograms. So quite a big shark. I think you'd be intimidated if you saw this in person,
speak for
or if you're in the
yourself.
water. uh, and on the sleeper sharks, that comes from their characteristic slow movements and activity levels. So then they move very slowly through the water, and they're typically non-aggressive towards humans. And there hasn't actually been any confirmed attacks, although I saw one thing attack in 1859. Supposedly, one was found with a human leg, or human arm, or I think it was a leg, in its stomach. So maybe there has probably been an attack in history at some point, but very, very rare. Other things, side notes really, the males are slightly smaller than the females. And the shark generally has a grey, blackish appearance. It looks kind of very old. So if you imagine a shark, just imagine one that's kind of all battered up and is old. But that's because it probably is.
It's kind of imagining like the BFG sort of.
Yeah,
That's kind of that's what's coming into my head the more you're talking about this.
Yeah, well, it's quite it's almost like a granddad of sharks. But that's actually because it is. Because why did I choose this life form? Well, it has the longest lifespan of any living vertebrate. Vertebrate meaning it has a spine. Its estimated lifespan is between 250 and 500 years. We have a section on this later about how we can determine its age and how it potentially lives so long. But that's why I chose it. It lives very long, longest living vertebrate. And so I thought that was very cool.
500 years is a very long time. Is there anything that comes like close to that? Is there like a second place that's like Not far
Not
off.
very close. It's even the lowest bound for its estimate of how its maximum lifespan is still much higher than others. So there's some tortoise, the big giant tortoise that lives 150 years. There's some types of salamander that live 100 years, and some whales that live a long time as well. But this one does top out its lowest bound estimate for its age, which is 250 years, just above that actually, is still much higher than any of the others I've come across. So
So that's a massive outlier then.
it's a big outlier indeed. But there's have to take into account there's other things in the sea we haven't discovered yet, so you never know. There could be plenty of things that live a long time. But another key characteristic is that they are often infested with a parasitic crustacean that is attached to the eye, and these parasites do damage the eyeball, that leading to almost complete blindness. But somehow it doesn't seem to impact its life expectancy or ability to hunt, because they have quite good hearing and smell. And one paper I actually found saw when they were looking at Greenland sharks and how many had this parasite, that 98.9% of Greenland sharks caught from the east of Greenland were infected with this parasite. And the parasite typically infects each eye by inserting an anchoring device into the cornea, and the parasite kind of swings freely about this anchor. It can feed on the tissue within the eye through its mouth. And yeah, I find this, like, you look at images and it's just a worm kind of hanging off its eyeball, just quite long. It's not small, it's big, you can see it. It's kind of gross, I have to say. Feel bad for them, but there's possibility that this parasites can provide benefit because of the bioluminescence that it provides. Maybe attracts prey to it, I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like a good deal for the parasite. You get free lunch for the next 250 years.
At least, probably, it's like getting a pet, and then it's always sad when the pet dies. So just get a Greenland shark. They're not going to die. Although, might not interact with you much, and they also might not live where you live. So they are found in the northern Atlantic / Arctic waters around Greenland, Canada, Iceland, Norway, but even UK. So maybe you could get a Greenland shark for a pet.
To our non-UK viewers, this doesn't apply.
Unfortunately, you might not be able to get one. But the shark's quite rare, so you might not be able to find it. But this is because it usually occupies the deep sea part of the ocean where it's colder, because it prefers the colder waters. And the Greenland shark is cold-blooded. It's an ectotherm, and because it lives in such a cold environment, it can be negative Celsius waters, like salt water and stuff. Its metabolism is so slow, and that's why they move slowly. So I was talking about the sleeper shark. It's a sleeper shark, so its movements are very sluggish, and it moves about 0.76 to 1.6 miles per hour. That's just its cruising speed. I don't think it can go much faster from what I saw. That's basically what it tops out as. But yeah, it moves very slowly, but it does get around. It's got that whole bit of the North Atlantic and the Arctic to go. But it could be potentially found elsewhere as well, where the waters are deep, because deep down in the sea it's quite cold, so it can survive. So I think it's been found around like Florida, or off the coast of Florida, and in even the Caribbean. So they are found elsewhere as well, so maybe you could get a pet. Although it lives quite deep, so you might not be able to visit it. The metabolism is dictated by the temperature of the environment, because it lives in such cold waters. Yeah, so they've been seen in depth around 2.2 kilometers deep, but they usually reside in the kind of 0 to 1.5 kilometer depth range. What does it eat? Well, it's an apex predator. It's the top of its food chain, and it eats fish, including smaller sharks, But the smaller individuals, like the young ones, well, young, I don't know if it's really young. The old young ones, the juveniles, also eat squid, and the larger ones also eat seals. Now, something interesting, I thought, well, the seals swim much faster than these sharks. They're saying 1.6 miles per hour
Yeah,
versus...
if it's a carnivore, then how could it possibly stalk any of its prey at that speed?
Yeah. So, seals can swim like 18 miles an hour plus. So this is a huge advantage to the seal, you'd think. So how does it do it? Well, they think that the shark ambushes what it's eating. So most fish will be able to outswim it. I think I could outswim it even. 1.6 miles an hour, I think that's faster and slower than most swimming speeds. So
I don't think I could outswim it, but
maybe, I don't know.
So,
I don't know exactly how fast a human swims, but yes, it's proposed that they just ambush while they're asleep. And so they also manage to sneak up on fish, and when they open their mouths, they just create like a vacuum almost that sucks and draws in whole prey into the stomach. But they also eat like rotten food, so like meat that's been left in the water, because it's got a very good sense of smell. So it's been found with remains of whole animals in its stomach and parts of animals as well. So I said the human leg, that was found there. Also a whole reindeer was found in the stomach, bits of polar bear meat, so all sorts of things. Probably wouldn't want to get eaten by one. You might get trapped inside.
I don't imagine like any like pollution affecting this thing well. If it just kind of vacuums in all of its food. So
pollution.
Yeah, I don't know if there was like lots of like waste in the water. I imagine that'd affect it quite badly.
Yeah, well, another thing with apex predators is they acquire stuff through the food chain. So especially if they're living 150 years, they're eating fish and stuff with contaminants already in them, and then it kind of builds up. So they have higher concentrations of these contaminants in their flesh. But also, because they live so long, they have a long time to acquire. Yeah, pollution also affects it because, in this section, about its longevity. So I was saying it has lifespan of 250 to 500 years, but because they live so long, they reach sexual maturity at an estimated 150 years. So they can't reproduce until they're 150 years old, which is problematic for a changing climate. I know I talk about climate change a lot in this podcast, but it is important. And for the shark, if it can't adapt or something pressures it, then a load of individuals could die, but they take a long time to reproduce because it has to wait to 150 years before it can reproduce. So pollution and other challenges that put pressure on the species mean it can take a long time for the population to recover. Also, it takes about 8 to 18 years for the pregnancy lasts 8 to 18 years. So everything about this shark takes ages. I guess the main thing that people wonder is, how do you know that this shark lives nearly 500 years? Or can possibly live to nearly 500 years? Because nobody alive now is alive in the 1500s or anything, 1600s, but we can determine how old the shark is with reasonable accuracy because of carbon dating. Now, carbon dating is interesting because you would take a sample of something and which has organic matter in it, and depending on how long it's been there, the amount of carbon-14 which decays over time will be different. So an organism, say a plant 500 million years ago, will take in this carbon-14 through carbon dioxide, convert it to its tissues, and it will have a proportion then. But when it dies and it gets, say, locked away in some fossil, then it's no longer exchanging its carbon with the environment. So over time, this carbon-14 will decay, and you'll have much less, and you'll be able to tell from the half-life of the carbon-14 how long roughly, or how old that plant is, when it died. So for the Greenland shark, you can do the same thing, although it is a bit harder because it's still alive. It's still exchanging carbon with its environment. So you have to take tissue which hasn't changed since it was born. So where do you find that tissue? Well, it doesn't have any really bones, so you have to take it from proteins in the eye, which were created at birth and don't degrade with age. So they do that, and through some analysis you can determine that with a plus or minus of like 120 years, it's between around 250 to 500 years old. It can live that long. So longest living being or vertebrate.
Poor eyes. They've gone through so much.
They have really gone through a lot. And because they live so long, they do probably grow quite slowly, estimated 1 centimetre per year or less. So the interesting thing about them really is, how do we apply their biology that somehow allows them to live so long to us, to help us increase our own lifespans, or at least increase our healthy lifespan, which is the age at which quality of life severely drops off due to aging or disease. Because loads of people grow kind of to a point where they're old, but they're also fine, and then they get to a point where like aging has really damaged them to they just can't really do anything fun, and the life's not really high quality. So how do we find a way of increasing that health span or increasing the lifespan? Because aging is quite hard to understand. We don't really know how we age properly, and we don't know how to properly slow it down. And aging, after all, is one of the biggest risk factors for the development of many different diseases, including cancers and Alzheimer's. So combating aging will reduce us developing these diseases. So trying to fight cancer and Alzheimer's and all sorts of different age-related diseases is definitely a positive, in my opinion. There's all that stuff about overpopulation from living ages, but certainly everyone would agree, or at least most people would agree, that cancer isn't a pleasant thing to have around. There's some theories of how they can live so long, but the first problem is we just don't know much about the shark, the biology of the shark at least. They live in the deep ocean in quite remote places. They're essentially quite hard to study. They're not even that common either. So one study from 2017 I looked at oxidative stress and the ability of the shark to resist oxidative damage. Because one theory of aging and how we age is that oxidative damage causes aging, at least in part. So as long-lived species live longer, they must be more resistant to the oxidative stress. That's the theory. So this study found that none of the biochemical metrics of oxidative stress measured in either the muscle or the red blood cells will correlate to the maximum lifespan of the species. So it didn't find that this oxidative theory of aging really held. So there's not really much difference between other species. Another theory is because these animals live in such cold waters and are cold-blooded, and they move so slowly that their core temperature is just extremely low. So if it's living in 4-degree waters or below, then because it's cold-blooded, most of its tissue is going to be at that temperature. It's not swimming loads to create loads of heat because it moves so slowly. So this slow metabolism, they have a slow metabolism because of their temperature, body temperature is so low. So metabolism is just what chemical reactions occur in the body and how fast they occur. This slow metabolism could explain why the slow growth we see in the shark. And in fact, we see an inverse relation between metabolic rate and lifespan. So organisms with higher metabolic rate live shorter. So if you look at small animals that have fast metabolisms, say a shrew, they have shorter lifespans compared to larger animals. So a shrew versus an elephant. Shrew lives, I don't know how long a shrew lives, up to a year. A mouse lives like 2 years. So compared to an elephant, just a big difference. And Why is this? Well, again, this comes from the free radical theory of aging, with that oxidative stress. So the more a cell does, so the higher the metabolism, like the more metabolic activity in the cell, then the more free radicals are produced theoretically. But this theory doesn't really hold fully, because in many cases there are species with high metabolic rates like bats and birds that live a long time. Think parrots that outlive people. So essentially we don't really know why they live so long, and we need more studies to look at any possible mechanisms, because I wasn't really studied that much until at least the last 20 years. There's a few more studies, but there's not a ton of research on these animals, at least from an aging standpoint. One of the reasons might be because you need, for these kind of health studies, you need to track the individuals over time to see how they change. And this is hard to do because of where they live, but also they just live so long. Like a shark that lives 400 years, how many scientists do you need to get through before you actually get to a result? And by then, who knows, the human race might be extinct. Anything could happen.
400 years, little pessimistic. But
Stephen Hawking predicted 100 years and would be extinct, so he's a smart guy. I believe we'll pull through. Well, maybe not us. Future generation of the Curiosity Monkey listeners will pull through using science and technology.
Yeah, I do wonder if like there are studies like ongoing looking at aging processes of, I guess, Greenland sharks and these kinds of animals.
A lot of the studies on, like, I think we only determined the age of it, how long it lives, in 2017. We just didn't really know much about the shark beforehand, so it's still early days. There's a lot of potential for further research. So one other thing, the last thing, which I think is fun about the shark, because I think it just represents something interesting about humans behave. So this is a molecule we've talked about on this program before, I think, to do with some deep sea creature. I can't remember what it was. But the Greenland shark has among the highest levels of a molecule called trimethylamine N oxide, so TMAO. And TMAO concentrations lie between 1.05 to 1.3 grams per 100 grams. So quite a high level, one of the highest levels you've seen in animals. And TMAO has various functions for different animals. And I'd say there's three main points here that could be why it has it. So high levels found in polar fishes indicate that TMAO may increase osmotic concentration, so increase the level of like solute, and this decreases the freezing point of the fluid in the animal, in the tissue, so the animal can stay not frozen at temperatures even below freezing point. So when it's swimming in -degree Celsius waters, essentially allows it to not really freeze, which is a good thing for it, because when cells freeze and defrost, they explode, rupture, not good for the animal. Another thing, point number 2, TMAO and its reduced form, TMA, are low density molecules that may improve buoyancy. So, well, if you're a marine organism, you just don't want to be sinking. You want to not have to expend energy on maintaining your position within the water. The third point, which is probably one of the biggest reasons they have it, because TMAO is a solute that protects proteins against the great forces exerted by the high hydrostatic pressures in the deep sea. So when you're down 2 kilometers deep, there's huge amounts of force. It's something like 2,000 meters, 2 million kilograms per meter squared forces on your surface. So if you think why it's so hard to develop submarines that go that deep, yet you have animals that can survive. If we went down there, we would be dead instantly. But somehow these animals survive by having high concentrations of these molecules that just protect the proteins against the bending forces. And why am I talking about this? Well, it is cool. I liked how it linked back to a previous episode, but TMAO in the diet to humans is toxic. So trying to eat a shark that has among the highest levels of this stuff would be stupid, right? Well, of course not. Don't be so close-minded. It's in fact a delicacy in Iceland. And yeah, so it is toxic, but is a delicacy in Iceland. And you can't just eat it because, yeah, it's toxic. So you have to treat it to be safe. So there's a few steps of how you prepare your shark, your Greenland shark. First you have to gut it and place it in a small, shallow hole dug in the sand. And you cover it with sand and rocks to create enough pressure to expel any fluid from the tissue, or as much as possible. As that fluid probably contains the solute TMAO. And then you ferment it during this process for about 6 to 12 weeks. After then, you basically cut it up into chunks and dry it for months on end. And actually, when I was looking at the Wikipedia page for the Greenland shark, there was a whole list of different TV shows where they got top chefs and just random people to try this Greenland shark fermented. As Chef Anthony Bourdain described the fermented shark as the single worst, most disgusting and terrible tasting thing he'd ever eaten. I think Gordon Ramsay tried it and he spat it out and said it was really disgusting.
I'm sure those were his exact words, yeah.
Yeah. I find it funny how it's just a whole Wikipedia section just dedicated to people who have eaten it and to call it disgusting. But well, the shark contains large amounts of ammonia and has a strong smell, apparently similar to that of cleaning products. So yeah, I think that says a lot about humanity. It's yet a delicacy in Iceland, but I'm not sure who eats this. But apparently if you go to Iceland, it's everywhere in shops and stuff. Maybe for tourists to try, or is actually for the local people who seem to love it. So yeah, that is the Greenland shark. I think it's pretty cool, and hopefully maybe in a few years there'll be some more research to do with its longevity, because that's why I picked it to see. But there wasn't a ton of research actually out on how it lives so long. But there are a few theories.
Again, listeners, get on it.
Liam, what did you have to, present your interesting thing? I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, yeah, I got a little less information because I decided I would go into the world of insects, which it's quite difficult to navigate. But so the precise creature that I looked into, I will be referring to as the wax-tail plant hopper. So it's a slightly difficult set of creatures to define, since they aren't from common families. From what I've been able to gather, they're all grouped under the superfamily Fulguroidea. And this is a type of plant hopper. So you could generally characterize plant hoppers as, well, they feed on plants and they hop between them. And primarily they don't walk particularly quickly, so they move through hopping and with some flying. So from what I can gather, the wax-tail variants are isolated to a few families in here. Two examples are the Flatidae and Ricanidae families. What makes the wax-tail plant hoppers in specific very interesting is, unsurprisingly, they have these large tails coming out the back that are made out of wax. So they look different through different species. So the ones in the family Flatidae, these resemble grasshoppers, and their tails kind of, to me, I would say that's like a white coral. So yeah, sort of very tail thing. There's quite a lot of them sort of protruding around in this kind of coral-like formation. While with the Ricanidae, it's more like strands of fiberglass in kind of like a cotton out the back. And yeah, the insect itself looks kind of more beetle-like. So these insects are about like 1 to 5 centimeters long. So yeah, pretty much fairly on the small side. So I guess now that I've talked a bit, there's a few potential reasons for why they have these tails. So one of the reasons is for camouflage. So these tails are very large, like larger than the insect themselves. So they cover them, and some speculations on what they allow them to look like are like petals, bird poop, and also some certain kinds of fungus that are anti-insect due to their appearance. They're also sort of defense from predators, so if a predator will try to eat it, they'll get a mouthful of wax, they'll be disgusted by it, and not continue to pursue the insect, and also be defensive. And also, they're hydrophobic, so they offer some protection from water, but generally with plant hoppers, they're capable of coating their entire bodies in wax for this purpose as well.
So, for the tail, is there like an inner bit that's alive and then the wax is on the outside, or
No, the tail is entirely composed of wax.
entirely wax? Wow.
So they have
cool.
lots of pores kind of all over their bodies that produce very thin strands of wax. So it's kind of, it comes out from those pores. And another thing to note about the tails is that they specifically, so I guess, with insects, some of them have what's called a nymph stage, which you can kind of think like sort of child teenager, where they're pretty much developed, but they're missing a few things. Like one of the key ones is genitals, but also with some species that can gain wings, also that. And these tails are only present on these wax-tailed plant hoppers while they're in the nymph stage, not in the adult stage. So, a couple potential reasons. One of this is that when the plant hopper is an adult, it gains wings, and their tail will not be so convenient with wings.
So just like too heavy, or not enough room for the wings?
It is very large and obstructive. So, species of the wings, the tail is not helpful. But if you don't have wings, the tail is incredibly useful in helping with jumping. So, because it kind of, again, it slows the fall down, allows them to control it a bit more. A study was shown that without this tail, the plant hopper's jumping accuracy reduces significantly. Without the tail, it is able to make about 1 in 3 jumps accurately, while with the tail, it's able to jump virtually flawlessly.
So maybe, almost balance? Would it be able to adapt if you chopped the tail off and left it? Probably not.
There is the question, it's, whether or not they can... And it's likely there are stages where it does not have the tail. So
I guess when it's in that stage, it doesn't have wings.
No.
So it has to jump to get around. So
I
guess
some of them will never develop wings, but for the ones
really?
that do, it's quite a few different species. I guess while partially through researching these waxy tails, I got into like sort of other reasons that insects use wax. So the common bugs that we know use wax are bees. Making beeswax for constructions and stuff. But among plant hoppers, there's a lot of ones that use wax in various different interesting ways. So I mentioned there's like the wax coating, which keeps water within the insect. But there's also with plant hoppers specifically. So a lot of these will be what's called like phloem feeding insects. So they're very long, sharp mouths that they'll stick into the phloem, which is like, you can think of like a vein of the plant, and suck in the nutrients. But the problem with this is that it's not very dense in nutrients that the bugs need. and it's a very high pressure. So they need to be drinking this stuff like constantly and constantly expelling it as well. So I mean, a bug will be feeding on this for like about 1 to 2 hours. And so the question is, how do they then manage the waste? And there's a few ways that they use wax in order to help with this. Oh yeah, also yeah, the waste itself is also very problematic, as it's very sticky, and it's referred to as honeydew. It's very sticky and hard to get rid of. So yeah, they use wax. So yeah, one thing is that they use the wax to prevent, because yeah, the honeydew won't stick to the wax. So they'll use the wax. So the wax tails will be used to guide the honeydew away from the insect. But there's also other kinds of plant hoppers that what they'll do is they'll wrap the honeydew into wax and then just kind of chuck it away to prevent it from sticking to anything, which is, yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I just think, yeah, they're very, very wacky looking insects, and yeah, their wackiness is a lot of very interesting uses.
Yeah, I think with insects, in particular, there's like, I don't know how many we've discovered. It's something like 1 million, but there's a predicted 10 million not discovered yet by humans. So there's so much variation in these insects. So I didn't know about this species at all before. And there's so many more insect species I just would have no idea about, but other people may have studied their whole life in a specific kind of area of a few insects. Thank you, Liam, for coming on this episode of the Curiosity Monkey podcast. It's been good to have another person on. But thank you for listening to this episode. If you want, you can follow us on Spotify and give us a rating, because this just helps promote the podcast. Also, we're on Instagram at the Curiosity Monkey. You can email us with suggestions or feedback on thecuriositymonkey1@gmail.com. And that's everything for this episode. So thank you for listening.
I might have forgotten to mention one thing. So very important thing. So it's also with like female wax-tailed plant hoppers. They use the wax to conceal their eggs. And yeah, the fact it's hydrophobic means that it protects them from water and predators and stuff.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Curiosity Monkey, and see you in the next one.